At her daughter's wedding, she was betrayed. Then a hidden letter changed everything. Eleanor Williams had spent her entire life putting others first for 47 years. As a dedicated nurse at Memorial Hospital, she had saved countless lives, working double shifts when needed and covering for younger colleagues during holidays. At home, she was the rock of her family, raising her daughter Rebecca as a single mother, after her husband Thomas abandoned them 20 years ago, without warning or explanation. Eleanor never complained, never asked for recognition, and never stopped, giving even when her own needs went unmet. The ivory invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, embossed with gold lettering announcing the wedding of Rebecca Williams and James Anderson at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Eleanor traced her fingers over, her daughter's name, her heart swelling with pride and a touch of melancholy. Rebecca had grown into a remarkable young woman, successful, confident, and now preparing to start her own family. Despite the financial struggles and countless sacrifices, Eleanor had somehow managed to give her daughter the life she deserved. Rebecca had insisted on paying for the wedding herself, with help from her future in-laws, the wealthy Anderson family. Eleanor had offered her life savings, but Rebecca gently refused. "Mom, you've done enough. Let me handle this. It's time someone took care of you for once." Eleanor relented, though she still spent weeks making handcrafted party favors for the 200 guests, each one containing a small handwritten note blessing the new couple. The week before the wedding, Eleanor received an unexpected call from her former sister-in-law, Margaret. After 20 years of silence, Margaret's voice sounded exactly the same, crisp, authoritative, and slightly condescending. "I heard about Rebecca's wedding. Thomas would have wanted me to be there." Eleanor gripped the phone tightly. Thomas had made his choice long ago, disappearing without a trace, leaving no support and no explanation. His sister had cut contact as well, choosing family loyalty over the friendship she and Eleanor once shared. "I don't think that's appropriate, Margaret. Rebecca barely remembers her father." Eleanor kept her voice steady despite the old pain resurfacing. "Thomas had his reasons, Eleanor. Reasons you never understood." Margaret paused, her voice softening slightly. "He wanted me to give you something if the time ever came. I've kept it, all these years. I think the wedding is the right moment." Against her better judgment, Eleanor agreed to meet Margaret for coffee the following day. At a quiet corner table, Margaret handed over a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "Thomas wrote this the day he left. He made me promise not to give it to you unless something significant happened with Rebecca. A wedding seems significant. Without another word, Margaret gathered her designer purse and walked away, leaving Eleanor staring at her husband's handwriting for the first time in 2 decades. The envelope remained unopened on Eleanor's bedside table for days as she focused on final wedding preparations. Whatever Thomas had to say after all this time couldn't change the past. Eleanor had long ago accepted that some questions would remain unanswered. Some wounds would never fully heal. The night before the wedding, she finally slipped the letter into her jewelry box, deciding that this weekend belonged to Rebecca. The past could wait a little longer. The day of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, as if ordered specifically for the occasion. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom was transformed into an elegant garden, with white roses cascading from crystal vases and soft lights creating a magical atmosphere. Eleanor arrived early, wearing a silver blue dress she had carefully saved for over 6 months to afford. Her hair, now streaked with silver, was arranged in a simple updo, and around her neck hung a small locket containing a photo of Rebecca as a baby, the only piece of jewelry she owned that held any value. As mother of the bride, Eleanor was escorted to her seat in the front row. She noticed with surprise that the opposite side of the aisle reserved for the groom's family was filling with faces she recognized. Colleagues from the hospital, neighbors from their old apartment building, even Rebecca's childhood piano teacher. Eleanor turned questioningly to the wedding planner. "Is there a mistake with the seating?" The young woman checked her tablet. "No mistake. These guests are listed under the bride's family section. The Andersons have the entire right side." Eleanor nodded, confused, but too caught up in the moment to question further. Perhaps Rebecca had invited these people knowing Eleanor had few family members to fill her side. The ceremony was beautiful. Rebecca, radiant in her white gown, exchanged vows with James, a kind, intelligent young man who clearly adored her. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes as they were pronounced husband and wife, the culmination of 20 years of sacrifice and love. As the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, Eleanor caught Rebecca's secretive smile, directed not at her, but at someone in the back of the room. Turning slightly, Eleanor glimpsed Margaret standing near the exit, looking satisfied. The reception began with champagne and photographs. Eleanor found herself separated from the wedding party as the photographer arranged elaborate group shots with the Andersons. She stood awkwardly to the side, clutching her small evening bag until Rebecca waved her over. "Mom, we need you for this one." Relief washed over Eleanor as she took her place beside her daughter. Eleanor Hayes, the photographer's assistant, called, looking at her notes. "Could you move to the center, please?" Hayes. Eleanor froze. Her maiden name. No one had called her Hayes since before she married Thomas. Rebecca squeezed her hand gently. "It's okay, Mom. Just go with it for now." Before Eleanor could question further, the reception doors opened, and the master of ceremonies announced the arrival of the bride and groom. Guests took their seats at elegantly appointed tables. Eleanor was led to the head table, where a place card with Eleanor Hayes sat next to Rebecca. The Andersons filled most of the remaining seats along with James and a conspicuously empty chair. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and Eleanor began to relax despite the strange undercurrent she couldn't quite identify. When the time came for her to offer her toast, she rose on shaky legs, clutching her note cards. 20 years ago, it was just Rebecca and me against the world. Eleanor began, her voice catching. Everything I did, every extra shift, every sacrifice, was for this amazing young woman. She looked at her daughter, tears threatening. "I am so proud of the person you've become, Rebecca. And James." She turned to her new son-in-law. "Thank you for seeing in my daughter what I've always known was there." As Eleanor prepared to continue, Rebecca stood, suddenly taking the microphone. "Thanks, Mom. That was beautiful. But there's something else we need to address before this evening continues." Rebecca nodded to the DJ, who stopped the music. The room fell silent, all eyes on the bride in her flowing white gown. "I have a different story to tell tonight. One that my mother doesn't know. One that involves sacrifices she never should have had to make." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine as Rebecca continued. 20 years ago, my father didn't abandon us, as I was always told." She paused, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. "He was forced to leave to protect us both." The ballroom doors opened, and a tall man with silver-gray hair and familiar eyes entered. Though 20 years had changed him, Eleanor would have recognized Thomas anywhere. The room collectively gasped as he walked steadily toward the head table. Eleanor clutched the edge of the tablecloth, her world tilting dangerously. Before Eleanor could process what was happening, Margaret approached the microphone. "I have something to say to everyone here, especially to you, Eleanor." She pulled out a sheet of paper, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. 20 years ago, my brother left his family because I convinced him it was the only way to keep them safe. She looked directly at Eleanor now. "I told him about your cancer diagnosis, Eleanor. I told him the doctors gave you less than a year to live." Eleanor shook her head in confusion. "There was no cancer diagnosis." Margaret continued, relentless. "I showed him medical reports with your name on them. I convinced him that you wanted to spare Rebecca from watching you die slowly, that you wanted to raise her on your own terms in the time you had left." She paused, letting the enormity of the deception sink in. "I told him you refused treatment, to stay lucid for Rebecca, that you made me promise never to tell him the truth." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face as 20 years of abandonment transformed into something entirely different. Margaret wasn't finished. "I did it because I was in love with Thomas. I always had been since we were teenagers. I thought, If he was free from you, eventually he would turn to me. Her voice broke, but he never did. He moved 3,000 miles away, changed his name, and cut contact with everyone except me. And I only heard from him when he sent money for Rebecca every month, money I never passed along. At this revelation, Rebecca's friends began to stand one by one. My college tuition came from an anonymous donor, Mrs. Williams said, a young woman near the back. My study abroad program, too. Then another guest stood. The down payment for my apartment, an older woman added. Eleanor recognized her as the elderly neighbor whose medical bills Eleanor had helped pay when she was younger. Then another, and another, until half the room was standing. Each person had a story of anonymous help, financial support that arrived when most needed. Help that Eleanor had attributed to scholarships, grants, or simply good fortune. Rebecca took the microphone again, her voice gentle. Dad never stopped supporting us, Mom. When he discovered Margaret's lies 5 years ago, he was devastated. He found me first, and we decided together he would stay away until we could find the right moment to tell you everything. He wanted to make up for lost time by helping all the people you helped over the years. Everyone standing here received support from him after hearing how you had touched their lives. Eleanor sat perfectly still, unable to process the revelation. Thomas approached, slowly kneeling beside her chair. I never stopped loving you, Eleanor. Never stopped thinking about you both. He reached for her hand and she found herself unable to pull away. The letter explains everything. Did you read it? Eleanor shook her head numbly. It's still in my jewelry box. I couldn't bring myself to open it before the wedding. Rebecca smiled through tears. This wedding was always meant to bring you both back, together. That's why we arranged everything this way. She gestured to the ballroom. It's your wedding anniversary today, Mom. 21 years ago, you promised to love each other until death. Margaret stole 20 years from you, but you don't have to lose another day. The room waited in breathless silence as Eleanor looked from her daughter to Thomas, trying to absorb the magnitude of the deception and the miracle of its unraveling. 2 decades of believing herself abandoned, of raising Rebecca alone, of working herself to exhaustion to provide for her daughter. And all that time, Thomas had been reaching out in the only way Margaret had allowed. Eleanor found her voice at last. Margaret, why now? After all this time? Why confess? Margaret stepped forward, her composure cracking. Because dying Eleanor. The cancer I claimed you had, it's real for me now. I have 6 months, maybe less. I couldn't die with this between us. She handed Eleanor an envelope. The medical files I forged 20 years ago and my real ones now. I know you can't forgive me, but maybe you can understand desperate love makes people commit desperate acts. The room fell silent as Eleanor stood facing the woman who had stolen her husband, her daughter's father, and decades of the life they should have shared. In her nurse's career, Eleanor had witnessed countless deaths, had held the hands of patients as they confronted their mortality. She recognized the yellowed skin, the thinness poorly concealed by an expensive dress, the wig covering, chemotherapy-ravaged hair. Margaret was telling the truth at last. Eleanor looked at Thomas, then at Rebecca, their eyes reflecting the same question. What happens now? 20 years could not be reclaimed. Countless moments were lost forever. First steps. School plays, graduations, ordinary Tuesdays and special holidays, all sacrificed to one woman's selfish deception. The weight of that loss pressed against Eleanor's chest, making it difficult to breathe. Then she felt something else, unexpected and almost unwelcome. Compassion. The kind that had driven her to become a nurse, the kind that had guided her through. Raising Rebecca alone, the kind that defined her at her core, Margaret would face the very death she had once invented for Eleanor. There was justice in that asymmetry that required no further punishment. Thomas stood beside Eleanor, now close, but not touching, respecting the distance 20 years had carved between them. In his eyes, she saw the same man she had loved, the father who had never truly abandoned his child. Eleanor turned to Rebecca. You planned all this. The wedding. Rebecca smiled tearfully. The wedding is real, Mom. I love James with all my heart. But yes, we chose today deliberately. We wanted to give you back something that was stolen. She took her mother's hand. Dad has never remarried Eleanor. Never even dated anyone else. He was waiting. Always waiting. Eleanor felt the room recede until it was just the three of them joined after so many years apart. She opened her evening bag and removed a folded paper that she always carried. A family photograph taken the day Rebecca was born, Thomas and Eleanor, gazing at their new daughter with identical expressions of wonder. She had carried it through 20 years of single motherhood, a reminder of happier times and the family that might have been. What Thomas did, after learning the truth, helping Rebecca's friends following the breadcrumbs of Eleanor's kindness, to extend his own, that spoke of a love that had never died, a commitment that had found expression, even in absence. The realization washed over Eleanor like a wave erasing 2 decades of hurt in an instant of clarity. I think. Eleanor began, her voice stronger now. I think we have another ceremony to plan. She looked at Thomas. If you're still willing. The room erupted in applause as Thomas embraced Eleanor for the first time in 20 years. Margaret slipped quietly toward the exit, but Eleanor called out to her. This doesn't make us even, Margaret. Nothing could. But I forgive you. As a nurse, I've learned that holding on to anger only destroys the vessel that contains it. I'll be there if you need me. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. Rebecca extended her hand to James, her new husband, watching as her parents began the long journey back to each other. The wedding celebration continued now with a deeper significance, a testament to love's endurance and the healing power of truth, finally spoken. As Eleanor danced with Thomas beneath crystal chandeliers, she realized that some wounds could indeed heal, some questions could be answered, and some loves were strong enough to survive even the cruelest deception. 6 months later, Eleanor and Thomas renewed their vows in the hospital chapel, where Margaret lay in hospice care. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress with her nurse's pin attached to the collar, a symbol of the life she had built alone, but would continue with Thomas by her side. Rebecca and James stood as witnesses, their hands clasped, their own marriage a bridge between past wounds and future healing. Margaret watched from her wheelchair, a blanket covering her frail legs, her face peaceful despite the pain. As Eleanor and Thomas exchanged rings for the second time in their lives, Margaret closed her eyes, her final act one of witnessing the restoration of what she had once destroyed. She passed away that evening with Eleanor holding her hand, Thomas at her side, forgiveness granted though never deserved. 1 year later, as Eleanor sorted through old boxes preparing to move into a new home with Thomas, she finally opened his letter written 20 years before. The yellowed paper contained 3 lines that summed up a lifetime of misunderstanding and unwavering devotion. I don't believe you're dying, Eleanor, but Margaret has convinced me that you want me gone. I will respect your wishes, but know this: I will love you and Rebecca until my last breath, and will watch over you both from whatever distance you require. Eleanor placed the letter in a memory book, alongside photographs of their reunited family, Rebecca and James with their newborn son, Thomas holding his grandson with tears in his eyes, Eleanor in her nurse's uniform, receiving an award for 30 years of service. The past could not be rewritten, but the future stretched before them, unmarred by deception, unbounded by time, a testament to the truth that love, when genuine, never truly dies. It merely waits for its moment to resume. This betrayal shocked everyone, but what happens when Eleanor discovers Margaret's final confession in a hidden safety deposit box? Subscribe and hit the bell to find out.